What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the STR podcast, otherwise known as the Start the Rebuild podcast. I'm your co-host Tim Fournier, alongside Ian.
Hey guys, how you doing? Just a quick reminder to follow us on Twitter at Start Rebuild Pod, on Instagram at Start underscore the underscore Rebuild, or just look straight up on Spotify at just Start the Rebuild Podcast. We should show up. Same thing on Google Podcasts if you have Google Podcasts instead. Also, our personal accounts at tim.fournier or Ian Mills01. We'll post all updates, content, keeping you guys updated with what we'll be doing. Today, we'll be talking about the first round of the 2020 NFL Draft. Without further ado, Tim, you want to take the first pick from the Bengals?
Yeah, so we're just going to be going through all the picks of the first round and just talking about what we liked and didn't like. So with the first pick, Joe Burrow going to the Bengals. This has kind of been the obvious consensus pick for a couple of months now. The Bengals did not screw it up. I think he's positional value-wise, he's the best player, most valuable player in this draft. I think he's an awesome player. And like I said, the Bengals just didn't screw it up. And that kind of goes along with the next pick in Chase Young going to the Redskins. They didn't screw it up. Ian and I both agree we wouldn't have been mad either if they took Tua, just because of that positional value. Finding your quarterback is super valuable and the most valuable thing in the NFL these days.
Yeah, I agree. Haskins, question marks about him, and it's a new regime. Maybe they already want to move on from him. Tua wouldn't have been necessarily a bad pick there either. I feel the same way about the next pick at Lions. If they'd taken Tua, I wouldn't have hated it. If they really, truly feel like they have to move on from Stafford, I do think Stafford's a good quarterback. But if they really feel like Tua is the guy, I wouldn't have minded them taking there. But Okudah, I think, is still a very good pick. Not just from a positional display when they trading Darius Slay away, but he probably was the third best value pick at that position. Mm-hmm. So Okudah, I don't mind that at all. Either way, and then
pretty much with these last two picks, we kind of agreed that they took the best player available, and we wouldn't have necessarily hated it if they took Tua, just because they don't necessarily have their quarterback in the future for sure right now.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, so at 4, Tim, I know you loved Andrew Thomas, and we both agreed that with the offensive line, pretty much they had to go here. And whether it was him, Becton, Wills, or worse, most people wouldn't have faulted them. So as long as they went offensive line, I think everyone would have been happy. And I know you think they took the right pick here with Thomas. If you want to elaborate on that at all.
Yeah, I just think he's the most well-rounded tackle in the class. I probably would have faulted them a little bit if they took Becton. I think Wirfs, Thomas, and Wills are the top three, and Becton's in that next tier. I wouldn't have necessarily hated it. I still like Becton as a prospect, but overall I think they made the right decision and they took the top tackle. And that leads into the fifth pick with the Dolphins. At this point, the entire STR pod Twitter was going crazy, going 5 for 5 on our mock draft. Make sure to follow that, like Ian said in the beginning. But anyways, they take Tua, our second favorite quarterback in this draft. A lot of people thought they were going to have to trade up to 3 in order to get him, to make sure they stayed in front of the Chargers. And they were able to stay pat and not have to give up any more draft capital, which I think is really awesome for them to keep all of their picks and still get the quarterback they wanted. They had a lot of smoke leading up to the draft about how they were going to trade up for a tackle, or that they didn't like Tua and they really liked Herbert, and I think they just played that masterfully.
Yeah, I would agree. Especially building their roster up a little bit better this offseason will only help them going into the next season. This next season's Dolphins will not be the same team as last year's. At 6, Chargers went Herbert. Neither of us really are in love with Herbert. We think he's kind of an average guy, or average, prospect at least. Big arm, great size, but we just kind of feel like overall he's a bit average in decision making and accuracy. We both were talking about this beforehand that the Chargers traded back into the first round at 23 we wouldn't have minded if they did that and taken Love there instead of or and gone like an offensive lineman or Isaiah Simmons
Yeah,
at 6, and then trade
yeah,
back. And we both agree that probably, in our opinions, we would have preferred them to have done that.
yeah.
I know you feel that way, Tim.
Like if they take Wills or Wirfs or Becton there, or Isaiah Simmons, like you said, and then they trade back into the first round and get Jordan Love, I'd be calling them probably the winners of the draft. I mean, that would have been amazing for me. I don't think the process of taking, like the ideology of taking a quarterback at 6 is bad at all. It's just I don't agree with the evaluation of Herbert that he's the next best quarterback and it's the smartest thing to take him there. It's well documented on this podcast that we are not big Herbert fans, and I just don't love it there.
Yeah, and it's not that we think he's going to be a bad player at all. Just he could. I mean, he could end up being good for.
Personally, I don't think he's going to be very good.
We'll see. In the right circumstances.
Like, I'm not trying to hedge my bet right now. I just don't really think he's a good player.
You don't think in any circumstances he could be?
Obviously, under some circumstances, I think he could turn out to be usable. But if I had to put money on it, I'd say he's not going to end up being anything.
All right.
That's just me. That's my.
I don't really even agree with you. I mean, I'm just kind of trying to give the guy the benefit of the doubt. But at 7, Derek Brown, safe pick.
Mm-hmm.
I know you liked Kinlaw more than Brown going into the draft. Brown likely the safe for probably new regime safe pick. Positionally, you were saying earlier that you had some questions about it, but overall, I don't mind the pick. I know you probably feel the same way. Although I do feel with the Isaiah Simmons, I think is a better prospect. I think I would have liked him a little more there, but again, I don't fault them entirely for it because Isaiah Simmons is probably a little more volatile than Brown is.
Yeah, I agree with that. Matt Rule coming in, new regime with the new coach there. I think Derek Brown's a good player. I don't have anything against Derek Brown. I think as mostly a run stuffing defensive tackle, that's not the most valuable position for this day and age. That's why I kind of liked Kinlaw a little better. I think he offered more as a pass rusher, but I kind of see where they're coming from. Instead of swinging for the fences, they wanted to make sure they hit a double, and I think they accomplished that. New first-year head coach. I think it's a safe pick, and I don't hate it. I don't necessarily love it either, but personally, I would have taken Isaiah Simmons. I think he would have been awesome there, especially now that Luke Kuechly's retiring.
Him and Brian Burns, I think, would have been amazing.
Yeah, him and Brian Burns and Shaq Thompson.
Yeah,
they would have been great there. But anyways, on the next pick, the Cardinals, they do take Isaiah Simmons. I think this is awesome value. I think he's an amazing player. I think he'll do great in Arizona. My gut reaction to it initially was I don't really know about not taking a tackle for Kyler Murray. I love Isaiah Simmons, the player and the value. But then in the third round, they still end up getting Josh Jones, who from Houston, who's a tackle I really like. So that just makes this pick look even better to me.
Yeah, I agree. Isaiah Simmons, I loved him coming into the draft. In our mock draft, I had him going at 6, I believe. Which obviously Chargers go Herbert. But I like Isaiah Simmons a lot. I think he's a freak, and I think that defense for the Cardinals is pretty raw at this point. So I don't mind the pick at all. Next, we got C.J. Henderson out of Florida, cornerback, picked by the Jags. When I saw this pick, I questioned it a bit. I don't think it's necessarily a horrible pick. I think there was probably better value on the board. Jags are in kind of a weird spot because, I don't know that they really are. I think they're really fully going into rebuild mode entirely. Sure. So, to go receiver here would have been kind of strange because you don't really have a quarterback. Although unless they really, I don't know. For me, it was anything they went here, I probably would have been like, okay, that's fine. You know what I mean?
Well, there are 2 picks in the first round, being C.J. Henderson and Kaleymon Chason from LSU. I think they had a clear plan that they're going for athletic upside, and I think that coincides with what their goals are for next year to maybe not be as competitive, take it as a rebuilding year, maybe be in play for Trevor Lawrence or Justin Fields in the draft next year at quarterback. So I think it works for them to take high upside, high variance players like CJ Henderson, as he's a really good athlete, showed pretty good flashes of good play, was a little up and down in his last year, and then with Chase on too, being a freak athlete who didn't necessarily have the production to go along with it, but both of those players could feasibly end up being very high upside players. So I think that kind of accomplishes both goals for next season and beyond.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's one of those picks where we'll come back in a few years and you know, obviously for all the picks we'll know. But so 10 Browns go Jedrick Wills. They needed help on the offensive line. That was number one positional need was offensive line.
Mm-hmm.
Wills probably second best tackle in the draft. I like the pick. I love it. I mean, I don't know. I think the Browns' hands were almost tied. They kind of had to go here.
Yeah.
They could have taken a different tackle, but I think offensive line 100% was the right move here.
Yeah. Going into the draft for everyone, it was pretty much not who are the Browns taking at 10. It's what tackle are they taking. They took they signed Jack Conklin from the Titans in the offseason, which is a good move. They really needed tackle help. Jedrick Wills also plays the right tackle, as does Conklin. And so one of them is going to need to move, which is a little bit scary. Sometimes it's hard with like a young tackle like Wills if you decide to move him to left, where young offensive linemen often struggle in the beginning of their careers anyway. With that switch might even slow that process down a little bit more. But I think that's lower down on the list of concerns. I think Wills is an awesome player, and I think the Browns got really good value with him at 10.
And then back-to-back tackles here. Mekhi Becton. I love this pick here because of the fact, well, you can argue maybe Wirfs is better, but, as long as you're taking a tackle here, I like it because for the Jets, I feel like, they really, on their offense, I mean, there's problems with defense, but on their offense, their line is horrible, and they really don't have any playmakers outside of Le'Veon Bell. So part of me thinks, maybe you take Judy here. But to tell you the truth is with I think a first-round offensive tackle is better value than a first-round wide receiver, especially when they go Mims in the second, who at one point was kind of considered late first. So I like the fact that they went offensive line here because, they signed George Fant in the offseason, but I don't think he's very good. I don't think he's, going to be the future by any means. So I like that they went line here. Could have gone receiver, and I would have been happy with it. But I think it makes more sense for them to go line, then receiver, then line.
Yeah. Jets tackles being, I believe, Chuma Edoga and George Fant. That's definitely not ideal for Sam Darnold. And I think Mekhi Becton's a good player. Kind of talked about it earlier, how I think he's maybe one tier lower than Wirfs, Thomas, and Wills, but I still think he's a good player. I think he has a pretty high floor. So I like the pick there. I wouldn't have hated it either. They went Lamb or Judy because Darnold also desperately needs weapons.
I mean, yeah, Jamison Crowder, I think they're number one right now because they left Robbie Anderson there.
Yeah, Robbie Anderson went to the Panthers, so
it's I mean,
it's not great for Sam Darnold over there.
Yeah, I agree. So Ruggs at 12. I'll let you take this one because I know you don't love it, but I just want to see what you think about it.
I don't hate Ruggs as a player, but I definitely thought he was a step down from Jerry Jeudy and CeeDee Lamb. So it was kind of a head scratcher why they decided to take him over those two in a vacuum before the draft started. And if you said the Raiders are going to take Ruggs at 12, and that's what I knew going in, I'd say, okay, good pick. But taking it over both of them was a little weird to me. Ruggs being like a really good deep threat maybe can make Derek Carr a little bit more aggressive, but I don't know. I like Ruggs the player, but I would have preferred to take Lamb or Judy in my opinion.
I think Ruggs' route running ability is a little bit underage just because he's so fast. Again, I like him as similar as a player. I like him as a player. I don't mind him at 12 by any means. I actually think, you know, yeah, I mean, I kind of agree. It's like I like that they're going receiver, um, and but it's kind of like a classic Raiders pick where it's just like, oh, the fastest guy available, we'll take it.
Yeah.
So yeah, but again, we'll see. It's one of those picks where all the receivers are kind of jumbled up, and it's kind of similar to the tackles where it's like, how do you rank them?
hmm
So at 13, we go Wirfs for the Bucks. I think that's a great pick. They traded up for it with the Niners. If they needed an offensive lineman, they need to. That offense is stacked. They have a
Yeah.
good run defense, and now they just need to protect Brady, who's 42 right now. Wirfs is the best tackle available by far. So I'm sure you like this pick. I like it pretty much just as much.
It's awesome value at 13 for the Bucks. Um, Not much more to say. He was the best player on the board, especially for them. Perfect fit, and he'll protect Brady, and we'll see how that works out this year. So next, with one of my favorite picks of the first round, 49ers take Javon Kinlaw, one of my favorite players in the draft. Awesome pass rusher, freak athlete, will perfectly replace DeForest Buckner, and you got him now for 5 years on a much cheaper contract. So I think that was awesome for them.
Yeah, I think they could have gone receiver here, but they did end up going receiver later in the first. So Kinlaw, stack that. The rich getting richer. I don't mind it by any means. And they trade back and get some valuable assets. So I don't mind that at all either. I know you like Judy at 15, so I'll let you talk about that real quick.
Yeah, so here we go. The Broncos get a huge steal in the first round. They get Jerry Jeudy. I think if the Broncos could have had any pick of the receivers at 15, and a lot of people thought they were going to have to trade up to get the one they wanted. I think number one on their board was probably Jerry Jeudy. He would have been mine after seeing that they took Jeudy over CeeDee Lamb. I think he just gets open. He creates so much separation, and he's going to help Drew Lock out a lot. And I think the Broncos are really starting to build a scary offense, and it's really exciting.
Pairing him with KJ Hamler, who is one of my favorite receivers on the second. Obviously, we're only taking my first round, but KJ Hamler and him back-to-back picks. I like that a lot. Giving Drew Lock as much weapons as possible to prove that he's the guy. And I think last year, for the most part, he proved that he is the guy. So
at least he's got some potential for sure. It was a small sample size, but I think he played well.
He played well in the time he was given. So at 16, AJ Terrell out of Clemson. Criticized for being a bit of a reach here, I know, but I don't mind AJ Terrell as a prospect. He's one of a pretty good cornerback. I know a big concern for him was at the mesh point, or at the catch point rather. He struggles, but there were some rumors that Atlanta would trade up to somehow get Chase Young. Obviously, that probably would have been better depending on what they gave up. But again, I this is kind of it's not necessarily a great pick. It's a bit underwhelming, I think, but I don't think it's the wrong pick per se.
I think getting secondary help is great. There was probably some corners that I would have preferred over AJ Terrell. But I think he's a good player. I think he's solid. It's nothing special there.
Yeah.
I'm sure they got their guy and they're happy with it. But he's a fine pick there. So on to the next one. Arguably the steal of the draft, if not just the first round, is CeeDee Lamb to the Cowboys. CeeDee Lamb is an undeniable top 3 receiver in this draft. Projected to be a very, very good player in this league. I think the Cowboys have a very scary offense now with him and Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup and Zeke with Dak. It was a little scary at first for me because they have, I believe, their top 2 corners and their top 2 safeties in the last year of their contract this year, so you almost really needed to go secondary. And they took care of that in the next round with taking Trayvon Diggs from Alabama. So I think that really put confidence into this pick now that this was just an awesome steal. Great value.
I agree they could have gone defensive backs, but I feel like since he was here, it's kind of like too good to pass up almost.
Mhm.
I like this pick a lot because if they haven't signed Dak to a long-term extension, and if part of them is thinking maybe he's not the guy, he has all the weapons to prove it now. I mean,
Yeah.
this is the year, Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, Zeke. This is the year where he has to kind of go out and really show to Jerry Jones that he's the guy, and worth the 40 million a year he's reportedly asking for. So
Yeah.
Austin Jackson at 50, or at 18 rather, to the Dolphins. I know you don't love this pick, kind of a project player. So I'll let you talk about that a little bit more because I don't know too much about it.
Yeah. So Austin Jackson at 18. I like the idea of getting some help for Tua and getting a tackle. I think he's just kind of a developmental player. I'm not in love with him. I think Josh Jones, who ended up going way later in the draft than I thought, I would have been. Uh, I would have thought would have been a good pick for them here to take Josh Jones. I think he's just a better player and could help more day one. I think Austin Jackson is on the same level as like Matt Peart, who went to the Giants later on in the draft from UConn. I think Jack Driscoll. These are just developmental tackles that they could have taken later on in the draft that I think would have been better values. I think they would have been better off going receiver here or Josh Jones if they really want to take a tackle left in the first round. I think that would have been better value.
Yeah.
So I don't love the player, but I'm not going to sit here and say that all of my draft evaluations are 100% correct. So taking a shot at tackle, I still like the idea of that.
I thought it was. This has nothing to do with the player, but I thought it was like one of the more cringeworthy moments of the night when Roger Goodell is like talking to the Dolphins player, and he's like, or talking to the Dolphins fans, he's like, Tua's gonna like this pick.
Yeah, what the heck was that?
I
Shut up,
hated Roger
Roger.
Goodell's little comments. Again, tangent doesn't matter, but so
Him and
19,
his M&Ms were just awesome.
he was drunk. He was actually drunk. Like
He was on something. Someone was in the M&Ms.
it was like a robot who was trying to be a human. But
He
okay,
got to a point where he was slurring his words, and I was like, "Geez, Roger,
he
lay
tried.
off."
The whole thing was really bad. But
Yeah.
so Damon Arnett at 19, right after he was picked, Trey
Talk about
Wingo.
people who are drunk. God,
Exactly. Right after he was picked,
Gruden and Mayock just again
yeah.
random corner.
I feel like they're just taking. I don't know. I feel we tweeted this off the account, and again,
Like,
there.
there's
I
got
was
to be guys that just go to the Raiders in at the combine or whatever and just have amazing interviews or something. Because
yeah.
there's no one that thinks Damon Arnett should be going this high.
Yeah, I agree.
I
It
would
is
think.
interesting because last year they took Cleveland Farrell at 4. We talked about it before, where it's like, oh, the
They
Raiders
took
don't.
Trayvon Mullen way higher than
Yeah.
anyone thought last year in the second.
We tweeted after the account that we don't know how if the trader or the Raiders know how to trade down. Obviously, takes two to tango, all that. But I thought it was funny. As soon as this guy was drafted, like biggest moment was like Trey Wingo was like, well, this guy was supposed to go in the 3rd round, but I just thought that was funny. He was getting called out right after his pick.
But just about the player, he's a man cover corner who isn't very athletic, doesn't really have the length you want, and he's a very old prospect. So he doesn't have, with the length and athleticism deficiencies, he doesn't have the abilities of a man cover corner, but that's what he's being drafted to do. Like, that's his specialty. So you really worry about him making the jump to the NFL. I don't know. Just didn't love this pick. It's probably the most head scratching one of the first round. That's all there is to say about that.
So we talked about Clavon Chason a little bit earlier. I don't know if you want to say anything extra about that. But again, kind of like a Trey Edmonds, like potential. The potential is there, and we'll see how the Jags can end up building off of it.
It's very interesting pairing him with Josh Allen.
Oh yeah.
In Jacksonville, because I think they're kind of similar speed rushers. I think that could be something interesting in the future. I think he's one of those high ceiling guys, maybe not very high floor. Like I said, could be good for the Jaguars if they don't really want to compete next year, but will have like a future prospect who could develop and really become something. So next was the Eagles at 21, taking Jalen Rager. I know a lot of Eagles fans were upset by this because they really wanted Justin Jefferson. Personally, I do like the pick. I'm a huge Rager fan. I think they really needed an injection of speed, and they definitely did that in this draft and some of the moves they made trading for Marquise Goodwin. I think Rager is an amazing deep threat and could really have a big impact week one on this team.
Yeah,
Freaky
they
athlete.
I think they probably wanted, to trade up. Didn't end up happening. Rager's a good talent, but again, it is to me. It was like, well, you trade for Marquise Goodwin the day after. You could have gone with a bigger guy here, and paired the two together. But again, I don't think Rager's a bad prospect. And this, obviously Eagles needing speed and a receiver just in general. I don't mind the pick. So Justin Jefferson at 22. I like the player. I like the prospect. Don't
Mhm.
like the Vikings taking here because essentially what it is Stephon Diggs for Justin Jefferson. There's a little bit more into it, and obviously the Vikings needed to trade Stephon Diggs because he was begging for a trade, or begging, demanded a trade basically. But the chances of Justin Jefferson becoming as like a top 10 receiver like Stephon Diggs is pretty low, just because that's the amount of receivers who end up actually being that good are low. Again, positional need makes sense here. Justin Jefferson is one of the better receivers in the draft, but to me, I think they could have gone a little bit differently. I don't know.
I think if you look at it as a one for one swap, it's kind of disappointing for them. Just if you look at it as they're trading Stephon Diggs for Justin Jefferson, but from the eyes of he's asking to be traded, I think this was just good damage control. I mean, if you let him stay on the team and then he's really talking to the media about how he really doesn't want to be there and he starts holding out or something, then all of a sudden, instead of getting a first round pick for Stephon Diggs, you have to trade him for a third, and then you don't get any value. So I think, and obviously you get Justin Jefferson now for 4 to 5 years on a cheap contract, so you're saving money. So I think, obviously, if you look at it for a one for one swap, it's disappointing. But for the amount of damage that was already being occurred from Diggs wanting out of Minnesota, I think they did a good job of limiting that damage.
Yeah, it really is. So 23 is the pick we were talking about earlier, where we thought Chargers trade back into the first and take Love instead of Herbert with a sixth overall pick. Although we know, Kenneth Murray is a middle linebacker, is a stud. I know you like him, and I like him a lot. But I know you had some concern, you had some problems with the trading back in. If you want to talk about that at all.
Yeah, I think Kenneth Murray is a good player. I don't have doubts about that. I worry about him a little bit in coverage, which is um, kind of the whole Chargers MO on defense. I think he's a good player. Just inside linebacker isn't a huge positional value, especially if you can't cover great. I think he has the skills to eventually maybe become a better coverage player. Um, I think trading back into the first for him, I don't really love that value, giving up a second and a third for an off ball linebacker who's not necessarily great in coverage right now. I think Patrick Queen would have been a better fit for them. I know they've had a lot of problems stopping their run over the past few years. So I can see why they'd like him as a player. I liked him as a player, but I just really don't like the value of them trading all the way back into the first and giving up a second and third to take him.
And then at 24, Saints go Cesar Ruiz. This is a pick where we thought they might go quarterback. End up signing Jameis Winston yesterday.
Mhm.
Cesar Ruiz can play center, guard, like left guard, right guard. So they were talking about earlier where they love the interior offensive lineman. Cesar Ruiz, potentially the best interior offensive lineman of the draft. Um, Drew Brees apparently does some. I don't know what the stat was, but Drew Brees with better interior offensive linemen is better than having good tackles. I don't know exactly what the analysis was, but I don't mind the pick here. I don't know. I wouldn't have hated Jordan Love going here either, but
Something we've talked about before is that the Saints have one of probably the most well balanced and loaded rosters in the NFL, just top to bottom. So I think this was just kind of a player that they think could be really good depth for now and maybe take over for, I think Andrus Peat is their starter right now. Um, I think with Drew Brees being on the last 2 years of most likely his career, having good depth on the offensive line is a good safety net for if a starter goes down and it would really impact them. I think he could plug and play really well. I think he's a good player. Positional value wise, that's been a common theme of this analysis. Interior offensive line isn't a huge positional value, but with a team that's loaded like this, they don't have many holes, and I think they just kind of took the best player available for them.
would you have preferred them go Love there?
Personally, I would have for sure.
I would have too. Yeah.
Because their roster's so loaded. I think um they could take him there, and he could develop really well.
Yeah.
But I think if you're really trying to win a Super Bowl in the next few years, I don't really hate trying to get depth and have that safety blanket, but
Yeah.
I was fine with it.
Speaking of positional value, Brandon Ayuk. Don't know if I pronounced it
Ayuk,
right.
yep.
Yeah, out of Arizona State, going to the Niners. We talked about earlier that the Niners could have gone receiver at 14, trading back in 13. Again, I don't mind this pick either. It's, again, positional need. Receiver depth is pretty deep in this draft, so you could have potentially waited, but again, trading up for it could be considered. Maybe not the greatest move, but I don't know.
I may be wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure the 49ers didn't have like a second, third, or fourth round pick.
No, you're right. You're right. They didn't. Yeah.
So I think if they wanted a receiver, this was the time to do it.
Well, but the thing is, so they traded back from 13 to 14, and then traded up from 31 to 25. So I don't know. Yeah. I mean, you're right. Maybe not having those picks, but I don't know. It is interesting.
Yeah, but Ayuk as a player, I think he's a good player. I like him. He has like a freakishly long wingspan for a guy that's I think like 6 foot. Like they're showing it on the broadcast, I think, and he had like his wingspan was an inch shorter than like Calvin Johnson. Like his wingspan is just like freakish, and then he is one of the best run after catch players in the draft. A lot of times you watch him, he catch the ball, and he didn't run super fast in the 40, but he just find a way to just fly past defenders, and he just hit a hole and he'd be gone. So I think with that special trait that he has, being in Kyle Shanahan's offense, already having to worry about George Kittle and those running backs and Deebo Samuel, I think he could be used really, really interestingly in that offense. And I know Kyle Shanahan, I saw him on the broadcast, was super, super excited when they got him. So that'll be really interesting.
We both love at 26 Jordan Love going to the Packers. We both love Jordan Love as a prospect. Packers, NFC Championship game last year, got smoked by the Niners. Niners ran all over them. Rodgers really only has Devontae Adams to throw to. A lot of criticism towards this pick because you could have loaded up and potentially gone for a Super Bowl run this year. For me, again, I understand that, and I don't even necessarily disagree. I would have liked that as well, but I like Jordan Love enough as a prospect. I think the Packers are giving up on Aaron Rodgers a little too early. Maybe not giving up, but I feel like he'll still be a good quarterback in 2 years, 2-3 years. So, I like Jordan Love, and I think I probably would have liked him more at the Saints or the Chargers. But again, I don't mind the pick. I know he got a lot of criticism for it, but I don't necessarily mind the pick.
I think it's a good landing spot for him from the standpoint that he's guaranteed to sit for at least 2 more years.
Yeah,
Um, so I think because going into this, it's well documented that we both really, really liked him going into this draft, but we always said that it would be smart for him to sit for a year or two, and I think
yeah,
he definitely has that opportunity here. I think he can be a really, really good player, which is why I like this pick. I know a lot of people, like you said, wanted them to go receiver or somehow get someone to help Aaron Rodgers, which I think they had an opportunity to do in the rest of this draft, but we're not getting into that stuff necessarily right now. Our next video will be talking about more of the rest of the draft, but I don't know what the heck they were doing the rest of this draft. A lot of mind-boggling stuff going on, but this pick by itself, I did like. Um, I didn't have a problem with it, and if the Packers can go from Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers to then Jordan Love if he pans out and is the player we think he can be, and have almost like 50, 60 years of 50 years of
yeah.
good quarterback play,
Top
that's
five
incredible.
quarterbacks, Hall of Fame quarterbacks. Yeah,
Yeah, that's incredible. So the next pick was the Seahawks taking Jordan Brooks, inside linebacker from Texas Tech. So Jordan Brooks, he's a really he's an athletic linebacker. He's a big thumper. Gets lost a little bit in coverage sometimes, but he's a good athlete, so maybe he can figure that out. Um, the Seahawks over the years have just taken really questionable first round picks. I think Pete Carroll's a really good coach, and he um, knows how to do what he can with his team, but they just take these weird players. Like last year, it was LJ Collier, who no one thought was deserved being in the first round.
Bruce
Jordan
Irvin a
Brooks, I
couple
think
years
he's like
ago.
a what would you say?
Bruce Irvin a couple years ago.
Yeah, him too. He ended up being a pretty good player, but
Yeah,
um,
but yeah, he wasn't projected to go in the
right.
first.
But Jordan Brooks probably projected to be in the second or third round. Just kind of a weird player to take, especially with Patrick Queen on the board. So this wasn't a pick I necessarily loved. I guess we'll see how this pans out.
Yeah.
Overall, kind of questionable for me.
Yeah, I didn't know much about Jordan Brooks coming in the draft because I didn't expect him to be a first round pick. And Justin, pretty much everything Tim says is, he's a good tackler, good power tackler. A lot of tackles for loss. But it is, yeah. I mean, just from a value pick, if they really are convinced he's the guy, then you can't really fault them for it. But you know, he would have likely been available later in the draft if they really liked him that much. Next, Tim, I know you're a Ravens fan. Patrick Queen has been hailed as one of the best picks in the draft, best picks in the first round. Positional need, Josh Bynes and Anawasar. I know it's not wrong, I butchered that name, but
Patrick Owasso.
yeah, there's an N in there, is there not?
There is an N, but it's silent somehow.
Well,
He's
regardless,
gone anyway. He's not on the
well,
team.
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. So positional need, him and Bynes leaving in the offseason. And he is probably the best middle linebacker in the draft. And obviously, the history of that position in Baltimore is huge. I know you're biting at the chops to talk about it, so I'll let you go at it.
So I think Patrick Queen is an absolute steal at 28. Pre-draft, I always kind of said I think Patrick Queen is more valuable in today's age than Kenneth Murray because he's a much better player in coverage. But if you really need that player who can also play the run better, you kind of want Kenneth Murray. So when I was thinking about the history of the Ravens, you think of Ray Lewis, and I think I was thinking maybe pre-draft that Kenneth Murray was maybe the top choice there. Maybe he could kind of he'd slide in better. He'd be kind of like the C.J. Mosley type. But then obviously Kenneth Murray goes earlier, and then the Ravens get Patrick Queen there. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought about how he's much better suited to play today's age, and I think that's a better value for the Ravens there. He's actually taking Patrick Owasso's number in 48. And I'm just really excited to see him play. He flies around. He's great in coverage. He's great sideline to sideline. I think he's going to be one of um he's going to be the next great inside linebacker in Baltimore and be on the same level as CJ Mosley was. Obviously, you can't say he's going to be like Ray Lewis, but I think he's going to be a really, really good player. Really excited to watch him play, as I said. And he's just great value at 28 for the Ravens. Perfect new age linebacker. Reminds me a lot of Deion Jones, also coming out of LSU.
Yeah. So next at 29 is Isaiah Wilson,
Mm-hmm.
offensive tackle out of Georgia to the Titans. I mean, offensive line is a pretty safe pick. You could have argued maybe, I know we were talking about Josh Jones earlier, but he obviously slipped to the third. I don't mind this pick. I don't know. I honestly don't. So I don't know too much about Isaiah Wilson, but line for the Titans at 29, I don't mind.
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of he was a late riser in the draft process. A lot of people really liked him. A lot of people weren't so sure about him. Can play guard or tackle. Um, Titans have a really well balanced roster, and they don't have many holes either. So I think it's a nice depth piece. Maybe he can become something.
Yeah.
We'll see with him. I don't have too much to say about him. I don't have a ton of knowledge about him, but
So next, I don't know about you, but I don't like this pick with the Dolphins at 30 going Ig.
Noah Igbenogany.
Yes. Roger Goodell tried to pronounce that, and I don't think he did a very good job. But basically, so you got Xavier Howard, Byron Jones, Nick Needham is an okay third guy at corner, unless they are gonna move one of them or play. I guess play three corners if he takes Nick Needham's spot. It is what it is. But to take a first round pick, I know they already had this is their third first round pick, but to use a third round pick on who will end up being your third cornerback, I think is a bit questionable. Again, they spent a lot of money on Byron Jones, and obviously Xavier Howard is they're still paying him. So I don't know. Maybe it's because they had the luxury of having 3 first round picks that they could reach and go with. I'll just call him Noah here. I'm interested to see
Igbenogany.
what you think.
So I think in general, there's probably some corners that I liked more than him, but I think he projects to play really well in the slot. He's a really quick twitched athlete. I think he has a good profile to play in the slot. And with them already having so much money tied to their 2 outside corners, maybe in the future as they start accumulating more contracts or more higher paid players on their team, maybe they can only hang on to 1 or 2 of them or one of them, so then he can fill in the role on the outside once he develops a little bit. So I think from a standpoint of he can come and fill a role in the slot day one is valuable. A lot of teams, pretty much almost every team, is rolling out 3 corners in their base defense now with the way the league's going. Um, so I didn't hate the pick because I think he fills a role and he's their guy. But in general, if you're taking a corner, he wasn't my favorite corner left on the board. So for me, I didn't love it, didn't hate it, but I was pretty alright with it.
Yeah.
But
I
the
guess
immediate gut reaction was he's not my favorite corner on the board. I don't really like that. But after learning about it more, I think he can fill that slot role.
I don't mind Nick Needham in the slot, but okay. So at 31, Jeff Gladney, is this a corner that you would have preferred at 30?
Um, I like him better as a player in general. He was super battle tested at TCU. I think he was the most targeted corner by a lot, out of any of the corners in this draft class. So you really know what you were getting in him. I think he's a good player. He really fits the Vikings really well at 31 in their scheme. Uh,
Yeah.
I It's kind of weird because I think Igbenogany is a better slot player than Gladney would be. So I think he kind of fits what they needed better. But if you're just taking best corner available, I think Jeff Gladney is a better corner, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, there's like this whole concept of the Vikings taking cornerbacks, or Mike Zimmer taking cornerbacks, often in the first with like Trey Waynes in the past. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's especially with Xavier Rhodes deteriorating and eventually getting cut. I don't mind the pick. Clyde Edwards-Helaire going in the first with to the Chiefs. So a few things about this pick is with the difference or with the new way that people don't want to pay running backs, and I totally understand why they don't want to pay running backs. Getting that fifth year option is huge. I think, and then I also saw something that Patrick Mahomes was talking to the GM of the Chiefs and said that he wanted Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the first round at 32. So that's interesting. I don't think a running back in the first round is incredible value. I also don't think he is the best running back in the draft. So it was a little interesting to see him here, but after learning about it a little more, seeing that Patrick Mahomes wanted him, seeing that the roster's pretty obviously stacked, they just won the Super Bowl, and the whole fifth year option thing, I don't hate it as much as I did when I first saw it. I think there are better options that they could have taken there, but yeah, I don't know, I'm interested to see what you think.
So, my opinion on this pick, there is no doubt in my mind that Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going to walk in there day one, week one, and he's just going to set the world on fire and be absolutely awesome. I think he's a really, really, really good player. I didn't necessarily have him as my number one running back, but he's super, super talented, really, really good player. And with the Chiefs' offense, pretty much anyone's going to succeed back there. And that's the reason why I don't think it's necessarily smart to invest in a running back in the first round. Patrick Mahomes is on a cheaper contract right now, but you better believe that he's going to be the highest paid quarterback of all time once it's his turn. So I think it would have been a lot smarter to start accumulating players who are going to be on cheaper contracts on more valuable positions. For instance, at corner, which they do have a need. They have a stacked roster because they have Patrick Mahomes,
Yeah, that's
but
probably
they
true.
do have needs on their roster that get kind of covered up because Patrick Mahomes is gonna
Scored 50
set the
points.
world on fire. So I
Yeah.
think at corner specifically, Jalen Johnson from Utah is a corner that I absolutely loved in this draft, and I think he would have been awesome value at the end of the first there. Christian Fulton, who slid to the Titans in the second round, was projected by most to be a first round pick. Um, and I think he would have been a great value there too. Maybe if you take Josh Jones and let him sit until he takes over for either Eric Fisher or what's her name? What's his name? The right tackle, Mitchell Schwartz. I think that would have been smarter, so you don't have to pay one of them anymore. Once you have to pay Mahomes, and you have a lot because they already have tight cap space as it is. So at the end of the day, I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going to be absolutely awesome. Fantasy players are going to love him, but I don't think it was necessarily the smartest team decision.
So overall, the first round, we for the most part think most teams did really well. We really only are concerned about Herbert. Ruggs is a little high because Judy was there. AJ Terrell, little underwhelming. Austin Jackson, a little underwhelming. Darren Arnett, a bit of a reach. I had some concerns about Rager and Jefferson, but overall, I think they're fine players. Kenneth Murray, a little bit. Jordan Brooks was a bit questionable. And then toward the last three picks were all, you know, you don't necessarily fault them for who they took, but definitely could have done better.
Yeah. Overall, I think this was a super talented class, and it was super deep as well. So make sure to check out the next episode as well as we cover the rest of the draft.
Yep. Thanks for watching, guys.
Thanks, guys.